All right, hello. So today we have Bing with us, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself a little bit.
Hi, my name is Bing Kongnibol, and I live in Orange County in the Southern California area. And yep, I'm here to talk about my experience, past experience, thankfully, with cyclic vomiting syndrome.
So, Bing, from what you and I have talked about, it sounds like you haven't had an episode in a long time, but tell me a little bit about how long you did have episodes.
Yeah, so it's about 10 years that I had to deal with it. It was on and off. It was during my early adulthood. The first time I dealt with it, I was around 21, 22 years old, and it continued for about 10 years. And when I say on and off, it was oftentimes associated with some kind of a big event in my life, which we can get into. And it was during that period where, for several days, it would be for me pretty traumatic, pretty violent in some ways. But then, after those episodes were over, I would go several months, a year, maybe even 2 years, without dealing with it. And this happened for about a period again of about 10 years of my life.
And how long did you have these episodes before you were diagnosed?
So I was never diagnosed, and I think this is part of my interest in, being part of this community. It was never diagnosed, and I never knew what this was, what cyclic vomiting syndrome was. So, around the time frame that I dealt with it, it would have been pretty much during the 90s, so early 90s to around 2001, 2002. I had never even heard of cyclic vomiting syndrome, and I assume that the doctors and other, healthcare professionals that I dealt with had also not heard of CVS. Otherwise, I would assume they would have at least brought it up with me. So I was never diagnosed with it.
That is interesting, and I mean, but not unheard of either. And so, can you describe what these episodes looked like for you, like what a typical one was?
Sure. So it would start with nausea. Um, just, without warning, I would eat something, whatever, a regular meal, and I would start feeling queasy. Starting off, um, nothing unbearable, just more uncomfortable, just nausea. I don't feel good. But then the next day, the nausea would get a little bit worse, a little bit stronger. Gosh, I don't know how I can deal with this. And um, after about 3 or 4 more days, the nausea would build and build. And also during that time, I would start adjusting what I would eat first with quantity. So I wouldn't eat maybe much of a full meal. I'd probably just, after a few days, I'd start more just snacking throughout the day as opposed to eating a full meal. But then I would also think, okay, maybe I shouldn't eat oily foods or spicy foods. I'd start adjusting the type of food I would eat. But the nausea kept building and building. And then after about 4 or 5 days, it would get to a point where I couldn't handle that nausea anymore. And I would start throwing up. And not that the throwing up, the vomiting felt good. It didn't. But at least I guess the nausea would be gone once I would throw up. And this period of throwing up would happen for a couple of days, and then to the point where throughout maybe an entire day, every hour or so, I would just get a vomiting episode, even though there was nothing in my body. So I would be dry heaving, or I would be vomiting internal body fluids. I didn't know what they were, but they would be like maybe a dark yellow or brownish in color. I'm guessing it's bile. I don't recall ever vomiting blood. But at that point, when I'm now not even able to keep anything down, whether it's water or even nothing, and I just vomit, that's the point that I would have to rush to the hospital. And again, we can get into my hospital visits, but really after a while, it would be the hospital just rehydrating me through an IV, and then probably giving me certain medicines dealing with some anti-nausea. Um, Not sure how effective they really were, and some more kind of tranquilizer sort of things, more things to try to calm me down. That was what a typical episode would be. So a typical episode would be anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks, and then it would just all be gone. Just all of a sudden, um, just right in the middle of the day, I feel great. I feel fine. I can eat anything. It was as if it didn't even happen for the last week or two, that I wasn't throwing up or anything. I mean, I'd lost weight, certainly you could see that, but once I could start eating again, it was like nothing ever happened.
That's always an interesting kind of, almost, a lot of people have described that as like the light switch effect, where you all of a sudden just feel better. And when you would go to the hospital, what would they attribute the nausea and vomiting to?
Okay, so the very first time this happened, so, I mentioned earlier that it was always associated with a big event in my life. The first time it happened was when I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree. And it was during that part that it happened. And when we first went into the hospital the very first time, um, they thought there was something wrong, say biologically. Maybe he ate something bad, bacteria or whatever. Then maybe they thought is an ulcer, or maybe there's some kind of a blockage in the digestive tract. So they ran a number of tests. I don't remember all of them, but it was things like having to swallow like a small camera so they could go down and look at what was in there. Found nothing. I remember swallowing some kind of a nasty chemical, I think barium sulfate, but I don't remember exactly what it was. And then so that they could have, some kind of an imaging device go in there. Those are a couple of the tests. They ran some others. I don't remember everything. But they found nothing. So, of course, they thought at first there was something biological. And then there was nothing wrong with me biologically. So they just didn't know. And then at the end of it, I guess they just thought, well, maybe it's something psychological, something, dealing, with the mental side of things. That's what they thought, but they didn't really know. And again, nobody ever mentioned cyclic vomiting syndrome. And again, the time frame, those early 90s, as we know right now, it's not widely known throughout the medical community. So if you think 30 years ago, it was probably even less known back then. So
Yeah, for sure. And if your episodes weren't super close together, I'm sure they just weren't making all those connections of what was potentially going wrong with, or what was potentially going on with you. Do you feel like, even though your episodes were further apart, do you feel like CVS impacted your life, and how?
yeah, it did. And to go back, I guess, to what you were asking before in terms of a hospital visit. So that was the first one. They ran a bunch of tests. After that, they weren't running those tests anymore. I'm not sure if, what the doctors spoke amongst themselves in the hospital, but after that, a typical hospital stay, and I should have continued on, was emergency room, all right? Rehydrate me with through an IV, and then anti-nausea and some drugs to help calm me. Later on, we kind of got into this formula. The two that seemed to work best, and this was for me, I don't think it'll work for everyone necessarily. It was Visceral, which is the anti-nausea that seemed to work or help, and then Ativan as the this on the psychological side. Those ended up being my typical hospital stays. After the first 3 or 4 times I had to go in there, it was go into the emergency room, rehydrate, Visceral, and Ativan. And then after several hours, I was out of the hospital and just trying to recover on my own. So how did it impact my life? I think in the long-term big picture, in terms of where I am today, I think I got through everything, and I don't think I would be anywhere different. I don't think my life would be any different today if I'd gone through it or not in terms of today. But during that time, it was very disruptive. There were times, so really the first time I dealt with it was, as I was graduating, but then the next few times, a couple times I dealt with it was when I was a graduate student at a couple different places. And that happened during the course of my studies. And there were a couple times where, I remember I was in the middle of a project as we were getting to the deadline to submit it, all of a sudden I'm out. I'm down because I had an attack and, just completely out of sight, out of action. And I had to, thankfully it was a group project. I had to tell a couple of my group members, hey, I can't do this for the next couple of days. Can you step up and help out and all that? And, it was one of those things. I told them, yeah, I'm throwing up, but I didn't tell them the whole story. I just said, I think I ate something bad, right? But I didn't want to tell them that it's probably dealing with me not being able to handle stress or big events. I didn't want to tell them that. I was embarrassed about it. There were a couple of times during my working career when this would happen. So say when, there's something where I had to give a big presentation, an important presentation, or I was about to go on a business trip, or even during the business trip where it was a lot of times just frequently excusing myself going to the bathroom to throw up, but, I'm not telling him that. And there were times where, it was very disruptive. I didn't think I could give my all to a project I was working on, whether in school or at work. And I again, I don't think I was able to accomplish things that I could have accomplished. And during that time, it was embarrassing for me because I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought it's all, some kind of a mental, psychological thing, me not being able to handle this and not wanting to admit it and hiding it from people. And, over the years, I did get certain comments, hey, is something wrong with you? Because I was going to the bathroom a lot, or not going to relieve myself but to throw up. But they noticed things that I would eat very, very little, and I would just say things like, yeah, I think something's wrong with my tummy. I probably ate something bad the other day. So it did have those impacts. That it was very disruptive to certain things that I was responsible for, that I was being counted on. It was very disruptive, and it was embarrassing that I couldn't admit it and be upfront about it with people.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think those are all things a lot of people go through. And I mean, a lot of people, can't even work. So that's fortunate that you were able to at least do that for that
there
time
were times
period.
though, in terms of not being able to work, there would be times here and there where I would not go into the office for that day or for a couple of days, right? But
Mm-hmm.
thankfully, it wasn't say like a whole week or a whole month where
Mm-hmm.
I can't even be there. But it would be like during some of these attacks where it would be 2 or 3 days I'm in the office, but not close to being the best that I could do. And then maybe a day or two where I'm not in the office, because at that point I'd either gone to the hospital or I was so weak at home just trying to recover because I hadn't eaten for a couple of days. So there were those times too where I could not work, but we're talking on the order of days, not weeks or months.
Mm-hmm. Do you have advice for someone who is either newly diagnosed or new to a journey where maybe they think this is what they have, but they don't have a diagnosis yet?
Yeah, I think the advice is, first of all, you're not a freak. You are not abnormal. That's how I thought for a good 10 years during this time, because I had never even heard of CVS. I didn't know what it was. I hadn't met anyone else or heard any other stories of people who had this. I thought it was just me. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought it was something where I was just abnormal, but it's something that would attack me every year or so. I'll just deal with it that way. And that's the way my life is going to be. So my advice to people like this is, that's not the case. You are not abnormal. You are not a freak. There are other people with stories like yours, and there are some people who are here to help you in this group, the CVSA, and also within the medical professionals community. There are people there that can help you. You don't have to hide this. There is a group here in the CVSA that's, I think, a good place to start in terms of resources, people to talk to, and you're not alone in this.
Thank you. That's definitely good advice. What would you like people to know who don't understand CVS, what it's like to live with it?
Um, well, I think what it's like to live with it is, as I mentioned, it's very disruptive, and I think for people who for people who have to deal with a sufferer, they need to understand that during that time period, that person may be just out of action. If you're expecting him or her to help you with a project, whether it's in your personal life or at work or at school, there may be a few days where that person cannot help, and it's not because they don't want to or that they're running away. It's just they have this condition, um, which um, which is hard for them to control. And I think the best thing that you can do in terms of trying to help this person is, one, understand it, and two, try to give them as much support as you can. And a lot of that is more just I think on the emotional side, that, hey, I understand, we're here for you, let us know what we can do. Sometimes if it's just talking to you, so that you won't feel so isolated, because I think in many cases I felt like I was isolated because I didn't want to talk to anybody about this. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't want people to um, know about it. So I think, for people who are trying to, help others through this, I think the important thing to let them know is that they're not alone and they can speak to you. Sometimes if it's just, how are you feeling? Is there anything we can do for you? And try not to get frustrated. I know it could be frustrating to those around you, but it's not anything this person wants wants to deal with.
For sure. For sure. Um, so I want to circle back a little bit to, so you were never diagnosed, and but this is what you believe you have, and I am not a doctor, but of course it does sound like that is what you were going through. How did you discover cyclic vomiting syndrome and CVSA in your
Yep.
journey?
So around 2011, 2012, something around there, so about 8 or 9 years ago. So I worked in the medical devices industry for a while, and I'd gone to a number of trade shows. And one particular trade show I went to was the Digestive Diseases Week, I think is the name of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this was for work, and I was just walking around the trade show floor. This was in San Diego, so if that helps in terms of the year. And I just saw this booth, and I saw the sign that said Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association. I looked at that, and something clicked. Not the light bulb yet, but something clicked, and I said, "Huh, I wonder if that's what I went through." Right, and at this time too, it'd been a good 8, 9 years since I had even had an attack. So honestly, for the past 8, 9 years, it's like I didn't even think of this. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't want to think about it. I just thought, I'm just glad I don't have to deal with it. But then I saw that sign, and I went over there and I spoke to the lady who was there. I don't remember who it was anymore, and I
My
just
guess is it
asked,
was Kathleen Adams, probably, is my guess.
Possibly. And I just, introduced myself, and then I said, I said, "Oh, what is cyclic vomiting syndrome?" And she explained what it was. And I said, "Oh my goodness." And that's when the light bulb went out. And I spoke to her about things that I had gone through, earlier in my life. And she said, "It sounds to me that that's what you went through too." And then, I got, whatever pamphlets were there. And I remember walking away just almost crying, thinking that what a relief this was, even though, again, I had been fortunate that I hadn't dealt with it. But I just, thought back to those 10 years, that if I had known um, that this was, a syndrome that had been identified, a good 100 years earlier, as I was to learn, just doing my own reading and research, just how different the experience would have been for me, more on the emotional side than anything else.
Mhm.
I don't know if it would have been any different in terms of me just dealing with the vomiting and all that, but on the emotional side, it would have been much, much different. And also for my parents, because they went through a lot, seeing me like that, and what they had to deal with themselves. But just, so that's how I learned about this, and again, nobody's ever diagnosed me, but after talking to Kathleen, doing some of my own research, telling her my story, I think it seems like, yeah, that's probably what I had. And so, and whether or not it's true or not, the fact that I'm going through symptoms that are very, very, or I did go through symptoms that are very similar to what a lot of other people who have been diagnosed with it, I have a bond, I have a bond with those people, and I know what they're going through.
For sure. For sure. Well, I'm glad you found us in such
Yeah.
a odd happenstance way, but
Yeah.
sometimes you're in the right place for a
Yeah.
particular reason, right?
Yep.
If you had one word to describe CVS and what it's like to go through it, what would it be?
For me, it would be frightening. And I think for me, the most frightening part of it was not knowing why, right? I'm going through this, once every year, every other year, but there's no answer about what's wrong with you. Like, let's say you have the flu. There can be tests that determine, yes, you have the flu, or you've got some ache in your body. In some cases, yeah, they say whatever, you have tendonitis or whatever it is, but in some cases they don't know either. I think the reason why it was frightening for me was that didn't know. It was never diagnosed. I was never told what it was, and that for me was frightening. Whereas even 8, 9 years after the fact, when I learned about this CVSA and what CVS is, that fear in a sense went away, because I thought, if I ever have to go through this again, the first thing I'm going to talk about with whoever sees me is, hey, have you heard about cyclic vomiting syndrome? Can you look that up? I think that's what I have. So that's the word I would use, is frightening.
It's a good word. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Um, you know, Sure. I think what I'd like to talk about is the last time I dealt with this, and my doctor, who quote unquote cured me, and I'll get into that. So the last time I really had to deal with this, was again around 2001, 2002, and I spoke to my doctor about it. I just changed some medical plans and all that, and so it was a new doctor, who I see, my GP, my family practice, and I had recently gone through an attack, and I talked about it with him, and he said, why don't we try something? I'd like to put you on Zoloft, and I didn't know a whole lot about it, but I'd heard a few things, just on some radio commercial or reading about it in some magazine. I thought, oh no, I'm not a psychiatric patient. I was hesitant, and he said, look, I'm going to put you on the lowest dose, possible, and he said it's very safe. If you start experiencing some bad conditions or whatever, then we'll put you off of it. But I'd like to try it. I remember him talking about things like it's a serotonin blocker. Maybe there's something going on there. I said, okay, fine, we'll try it. It's like almost like, what have I got to lose? And he assured me it was safe in terms of the dosage. And I was on that for a couple of years. And during that time, no attacks, no nausea. I mean, yeah, I had nausea here and there, but I don't think it was related to CVS. It probably was something that I had eaten, or a period where I was really, really nervous about something, but nothing. And then after a couple of years, we talked about it again, and he said, I think it seemed to have some pretty good results. Let's take you off of it. Not the next day. I had to slowly come down from it. And one of the things I was worried was a very, very big event was about to happen in my life. I was going to get married. And so I think I was off the Zoloft maybe a month or two before I was about to get married. And since then, nothing. I've never dealt with it. Now, can I say I'm cured? I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Can I say that if I am cured, it was the Zoloft that cured me? Again, I don't know. But I just want to raise that, and so that yourself and the other people who are researching it could be another thing for you to possibly look at if you haven't looked at already. I just wanted to raise that that was the last time I dealt with it. And if there's, something there, then, maybe. So